The question I'm going to pose is, you have workplace environments where you're doing stuff. You have healthcare environments where people are starting to do stuff. How far out are we before we start to see real transformations happen? And we have to play kind of, futurist here in some way. But what is it going to take to really enable transformative experiences to happen? You have research. So.
Well, I think that workplace is much further along than healthcare. Healthcare has been driven by operational and procedural and clinical constraints for a long time. It was never seen to be a competitive business. It was always seen to be more like a utility. I think that the rise of competition, the deregulation in healthcare, the emergence of choice across a wide variety of providing situations has created a marketplace view of healthcare that is changing how they do. Regulation like the Affordable Care Act and other regulatory changes that are changing are making that environment really be on some shifting sands, and what's going to work and who pays for what and what's available to who is changing every day. So I think there's a ton more work to do around this very key thing. We're hoping doing some of the foundational research into that to understand where the opportunities are for providers to do a better job. I think workplace is something that has similar complexities, but less constraints around regulatory and some of the technical aspects of hospital operation. So I think that healthcare is way behind in this, and is much more opportunity.
Just to build on that, I think there are kind of also two still major barriers in healthcare. One, budgets. Yes, healthcare has money, but it's also under constrained budgets. And so when you're dealing with a business that's at best on a 1% to 2% contribution margin, they have to be really thoughtful about their investments. And so they have to do things very small step at a time. A lot of the systems that we work with have done great improvements an inch forward. So even that inch has made an impact, but it's really not a foot or a mile. We're not even close. The other side of it is that culturally, it's really difficult. So whereas your employee base is hungry and eager and actually see it as part of the value proposition, the individuals developing and delivering experience in healthcare are physicians that are not very comfortable with change. And so with design, with digital, with the evolution of experience and environmental change, needs to be both cultural shift and to some extent a comfort that there's not going to be a business case.
Yeah, for some reason there always has been, or for as long as I can remember anyway, and there is now a tremendous amount of graphic work being done in the children's healthcare area, right? For some reason they don't think adults give a shit, but there's all these great, design projects that are done in children's environments. But what I think is really interesting about what these guys are doing in as an alternative to sort of these conceptual essence applications that designers do in both workplace and in children's healthcare is that it's data-driven, it's purpose-driven. They can kind of prove it before the fact and then use those learnings to implement something that has a real functional effect, which I think is pretty compelling.
I think the data thing is a really important measurement because, there have probably been lots of studies before that were more anecdotal in nature in terms of real perceptions, what consumer perceptions have been. And so in terms of how you engage your clients in terms of that, is there a sort of roadmap towards a new experience in any of these scenarios? I mean, Google sort of was unique in that sense in that they brought that culture internally and the design somehow reflects that. When you don't have a culture there, like you said, doctors don't want to change and it's change-driven. It's a change-driven requirement for that process. How do you navigate that in terms of where you go?
So the one thing that physicians like and don't balk at is data. This is actually critical in convincing them that change is for the best. And so actually, we're going to be engaging our clients, both existing and then kind of other folks, because people are interested and they want to know. One, to help them create change within their organizations. And two, more specifically, identify the points in the experience that they want to focus in.
I think demonstration is still going to be the best way. Success, when some hospital system takes this on or some clinical provider decides to adopt a much, much more patient-centric approach, the success of that provider will get the attention of others in this newly competitive environment. So I think that it's just going to be a slog. It's going to be like doing demonstrations, doing projects, trying to get the idea that this is doable, though. I mean, the technological advances that are allowing so much more seamlessness and the ability to kind of jumpstart some of these experiential frustrations are, growing. And while, clinical care and medicine and the actual things are happening in medicine are amazingly advancing at a rapid pace, it's just that everything else around it is not. And I think that this is just a matter of catch-up and demonstration of value that has to happen before it really takes off.
Have there been any, did you base your research off of any kind of baseline studies or other similar type of models that have been developed, say, outside of the US, for example?
I laugh because outside of the US, it's worse. National health system in the UK doesn't have enough money to do any kind of research on consumerism. In Asia, they're starting to break the barrier of we realize we have choice, although it's new, and it's only among a certain wealth class. And there are studies out there around, yes, the patient is becoming a consumer. Although those studies are not necessarily linked to the actual process. So yes, they want more technology. Okay, but where? Yes, they want greater connection to the provider. Okay, but where? Where along the journey? So this is essentially the first study where we're actually linking the things that consumers want and think about to the stages of the journey. And so that helps us prioritize and figure out what we need to deliver when.
Please.
In the study, well, in your remarks, you mentioned a little bit about a trend toward more decentralized healthcare starting to show, especially starting to show up in retail environments. So, for example, Walgreens is experimenting with these clinics built into their stores where you can get expanded, relatively straightforward services, but expanded services that you normally would have to go to your provider or a hospital to receive. And in those environments, that experience is going to be linked with the perception of that brand. Do you see that having an impact both on their bottom line, but also from a brand standpoint on the larger providers?
One of the best examples of that recently, you saw it in the news, the way Walgreens walked away from, or CVS walked away from cigarette sales in their stores as they were really starting to push healthcare and clinical care into underserved areas and as part of their retail offer. They realized there was a big disjuncture between selling cigarettes and actually having this stance around health. So I think you'll see some of that happening where providers who are both providing convenience at retail and also providing healthcare are going to have to start to rationalize their offers in ways that make sense. I think when you see the big boxes like Walmart and Target and Walgreens and CVS and all these people are actually seeing that their ability to fulfill their higher order missions, right, however they characterize them, is really proven by their ability to invest in a more distributed healthcare, more access to healthcare in places where healthcare doesn't exist today. And I think that all those brands are doing good work around that new distribution model for healthcare, where it's taking pressure off the hospitals, which are underfunded and overtaxed, and actually getting it closer to providers who sometimes have trouble with transportation or have trouble with the intimidation of going to a hospital or a waiting room or a doctor's office. And this idea of both breaking barriers around geographic access as well as kind of psychological barriers around the intimidation factor is hugely important for this country as we kind of move away from just the big central hospital into care being given in a much more distributed fashion.
It's also, on the flip side, from a healthcare system perspective, pushing systems to adapt. They realize that with hospital-based care, they cannot fulfill the needs of their consumers, and without having consumers within their system across the vertical integration, they can't serve them. And so it's pushing systems. One of our clients, Northwestern University, Northwestern Medicine, are starting to open up retail centers, retail clinics. And it's breaking barriers for them because there's a perception that you can't get in, that access, quite literally an appointment, is impossible. And so these retail environments are actually creating almost something like access to excellence, where you're now able to access all of that excellence from Northwestern Medicine right there in your community without an appointment. So both kind of on the retailer side as well on the system side, we'll see more of it. We'll see a lot more of it.
Other? Yes, I'll come back.
Yeah, this question's primarily for Graham. My compliments on the Google environment that you created. And as we listen to the data that was gathered on healthcare in preparation of making changes, you implemented a change in an environment at Google. Was there data to begin to support that? Has there been any metrics that have measured the results of that implementation on productivity, retention, worker happiness, et cetera, that you could share with us?
That's a great question.
Google has something called a ticket system, which is not unlike large corporations, whereby their employees can, submit these tickets that say, they hate something or like something and so forth. And so the response to the environments we've created has been largely, positive. If somebody does complain, and they do sometimes about something specific, we'll change it. They'll change it out. It's, I don't know about workplace environment, especially with regard to Google. So the culture at a place like Google is very different from like a healthcare environment. You walk into a room with these guys, and as sort of outlined by their 10 things, they're like, they don't need to go get like approval from superiors to say yes. There's no formal kind of, bureaucratic environment. A lot of the vendors who were a part of our teams, will come into meetings just to give you a taste of kind of how it feels and works there. And they start lecturing Google about, their level of expertise in a particular area. It could be lighting or so forth. And then they're just not at the next meeting. It's very organic, and it's very kind of flowing. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't work, and we change it. So no real metrics that I can speak of. Yeah.
I think though in workplace and environments, I think that our friends from Gensler probably do have some studies that were done with Steelcase, I think, recently or in the last few years that did actually pull up some really interesting data around correlations between workplace environments and productivity and sick days and absences and all these things. So it's actually, I think Gensler has some really good research around that done with one of the big furniture suppliers.
I think you guys put out something quarterly or bi-yearly or whatever it is that publishes those results. They don't refer specifically to graphics. I know they do refer to our architectural environments and so forth, and ergonomics and fresh air and the environment and so forth. And it's super helpful stuff to refer to. And we do refer to the Gensler reports.
Any last thoughts, questions? Yeah.
Are you able to talk at a high level about how extensive or expensive this is and how it could adapt to different clients and different projects, scope-wise?
Yeah. On the gathering side of the research? Yeah. Well, you talk about that specifically, but I think in general, you know, research is cheap, right? Almost at any price, it's cheap because of the knowledge that oftentimes you can gather from it. I mean, this is a very kind of special thing, very specialized around a you know, critical area in society. But you know, a lot of the research we do is actually, you know, you could call it expensive if it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. But oftentimes it gets beyond the kind of self-reported, the kind of you know, customer satisfaction type of research, where analytics now and more big data you know, filtering has allowed actually more predictive, more statistically relevant, and also this idea of research being not self-reported, but sort of derived, and derived information that really tracks how people will act as opposed to what they say they do is super much more powerful. That's where we love, a lot of our work is based around that derived information. So I think that kind of research is priceless. You can tell so much.
So to put the numbers on it, I'll tell you the majority of the cost of this is the analysis. The second part of the cost are the providers. These are C-suite execs. Assuming you're not going to be talking to those folks and you just talk to consumers, polling 1,000 consumers on healthcare that have had a healthcare experience in the last 12 months is going to cost you about $6,000. It doesn't break the bank. Writing the survey, doing the analysis, developing the presentations, that's the time suck. And it's worth the work. The other side of it is the free research that's available that Peter was alluding to. So Google Analytics, looking through Twitter, looking through Mashable, looking through Pinterest, Vine, looking through Facebook, looking through all of these sources, Hootsuite or Brandwatch, giving you an analysis and a consolidated view about how consumers are talking about your brand, what they are finding important. That's free. And I will tell you, we've used it. One of the healthcare systems we work with, we developed a social scraping to understand what people talk about when they talk about an amazing experience and what they talk about when they complain. This social scraping directly fed in and resulted in the development of service standards. Cost of research?
Any last other thoughts? Thank you all very much. I think it's been really a great dialogue.